Hello, class. My name is Christopher Kruger, and I'm working with Mary Stewart this week on our conference week assignment, reviewing term papers. Mary put together an excellent paper. I'm going to walk through the title, the highlights, and the overall thesis of her paper, and then we're going to take some time and offer some constructive criticism on ways that this paper can really grow and develop into an excellent final project as we conclude the class. The paper title, and bear with me, I have a lot of notes to try and navigate through this. The paper is titled Syrian Refugee Crisis, EU Policies and Decision Making. And the main thesis is this is an explanation of the role Greece, Italy, and Germany have played in the Syrian refugee crisis. It goes in, and I believe that is the thesis, that point she's trying to make, that these three countries played a critical role in serving refugees. And as you can see, maybe not well, but I've got a map here. I'm pointing to Syria. We're talking about Greece, Italy, and Germany. And we'll touch on these in detail in her paper. And it's just fascinating. Sometimes we forget where Syria is located as it relates to all of our EU countries, that it was impossible for them not to be pulled into this conflict. So the paper starts with an explanation of the crisis and all of the displaced immigrants that have been happening in this horrible, horrible crisis in Syria. It goes in then to describe the genesis of the crisis, Arab Spring, ISIS, ISIL, and eventually gets to the thesis of these three countries playing a critical role helping to save the refugees. It then gets into discussing the impact of Greece with interesting highlights on the incentives provided by the EU regarding hotspots. Hotspots were in Turkey and Greece as well. And the paper does an excellent job of providing really current data and numbers, the numbers of immigrants that came to Italy, that came to Greece, that came to Germany. I think it's very well sourced and does a strong job of providing this information. The paper then illustrates that Germany, even though it's the farthest away country, I know, again, hard to see on the map, but Germany is so far away from Syria, where many of these refugees have been able to easier get to countries through the Mediterranean Sea, where Germany is through many other countries. They have had one of the biggest roles in this entire conflict. And you think about all the politics that are happening in Germany and how Merkel and other leaders have dealt with this situation. It's really fascinating to think about how far they are from the actual impacted area. And again, it also touches on the hotspots, areas where they are welcoming in the refugees. The entire time that the paper is focusing on these three countries as it deals with this Syrian refugee crisis, it's through the lens of the difficult decisions that have been made or forced to be made by the EU. And that really touches on a lot of the topics that we've been focusing on class all term. The EU, going back to the integration of the EU, and how each country still acts as its own state many times, especially in dealing with such a global tragedy as the Syrian refugee crisis. The paper does a strong job of illustrating that. And it concludes by hitting again on the thesis that these three countries were really forced to play a large role and continue to play a large role in dealing with the Syrian refugee crisis, and how each of them on their own is kind of trying to address the growing concerns that are playing out through the EU, and these three countries being prime examples of what is happening and how they are addressing this conflict. Next, I want to take some time to point out some potential areas of improvement and really provide some constructive criticism on the paper. Again, as I open with, I think this is strongly written and there's a lot of great sourcing and data and numbers, but I think there are a couple areas of focus where you could look to improve. First, let me start, and again, I have some notes here. So to me, I found the thesis unclear and a little buried. It was hard for me to really get at the core of what argument you were trying to make us interested in and capture our attention. Again, there's a lot of great information, but it's difficult to ascertain the argument until the third page or so. So maybe move it up into the first couple paragraphs and clearly state what we are going to be focusing on. In general, again, the paper is well written, but it just needs a little bit better organization. Maybe headings would help. Maybe intro with thesis and then a different section of argument, like why Italy, Greece, and Germany were hit so hard, or were there more relevant countries that this issue should take a look at. Another area that you could possibly look into, and it was something that I worked on my paper with the professor, is there a counter argument? Would some argue that other countries in the EU have endured greater challenges relating to the Syrian refugee crisis than the three that were mentioned in this paper? Would it be interesting to know that that'd be interesting to know, and it could add a little bit more depth to the paper to refute those arguments. Specifically, there's a section describing growing violence in Syria, including the description of ISIL, and this should, I think, probably go in the beginning because this is what led to the refugee crisis. So it should precede the information about the crisis if we learn why we got to this point, how we got to this point. Continuing with some thoughts on working to improve this paper, just some grammatical tips. I think a less passive language would probably help achieve the argument. Better academic language would help strengthen what you have here, and the opportunity to use more citations, or maybe some of them were missed. And let me provide an example here on your draft. On page 6, there's a sentence, and I quote, "There are many that claim to have been raped by illegal immigrant men in cities throughout Germany." That's really interesting, but this probably needs to be cited, and it's kind of a big sweeping statement that would be better served with a source. Also, in touching on the three countries, probably need a little bit more on Italy, since it's part of the thesis with Greece and Germany. It's mentioned as a hotspot, but not in great detail, and probably a little bit more there to equal the depth of detail provided on Greece and Germany would help the paper. So in closing, again, Mary Stewart's paper, Syrian Refugee Crisis, EU Policies and Decision Making, is a great, timely topic that needs explored, especially as it relates to the countries focused on Italy, Greece, and Germany. I think everyone in the class will find it very interesting, and there's a lot of great facts, figures, data, and there's a very important story to be told here. And I think hopefully with some of these suggestions and some better organization and just kind of getting things a little bit more organized, clearly, coherently, um, tightening up some of the grammar and providing a little bit more background on the crisis itself and some more depth on these countries and as it relates to the EU. And I think you will provide us all with an excellent final paper. Thank you. I appreciate it. And I look forward to comments or feedback on the Slack channel or on Blackboard, and I will try to get back to anyone that inquires. Thank you. I appreciate it.